Hello friends, I thought I would do a little video here to flip through my sketchbook from the Learn to Paint podcast 20 for 20 art challenge for the fall of 2023. In this challenge, I set myself up some very specific goals, and that was I was going to paint for 20 minutes each morning before I did anything else, and I was going to paint in this particular homemade journal on which I had pre-toned all of the pages. You can see here I haven't painted the cover of this journal yet. I did laminate some watercolor paper to the front of this journal. I don't know if laminate's the right word. I adhered some watercolor paper to the front of this journal, and I have pre-toned it, as you can see, with a sort of vibrant pink and a sort of yellow ochre color. And this is a perfect example of what my pre-toned pages looked like. So let's get into it. So this is my very first page of this journal. It's the first day of the challenge and basically my first attempt at using pre-toned paper. And I had toned this one with that same pink and yellow that you saw on the cover. So I decided to use a reference photo I had taken of apples on a branch and see what I could do and how I could play around with making the shapes emerge from the background. This one's a bit rough and ready. Again, I was trying out a new technique, and there's never anything wrong with that. With this spread, things get a little bit more interesting. For this page here on my left, I had pre-toned the page here with a sort of square of blue, and then there was some yellow and some more blue and then some yellow that you see down here. And when I looked at this page, I had also taken a reference photo just a couple days before of this white house where one side was in bright sun and one side was in shade. And I looked at the way I had toned this page and I just thought it was perfect. It was setting me up for the shadow shapes of this house. So that is what I reproduced here, and I was very excited about how that worked. And on the page on the right, I had sort of just painted, as you can see, these kind of diagonals of blue and yellow, and I decided to leave this yellow patch in the middle for these little mushrooms from another reference photo I had taken, and then fill everything else in with the kind of moody, dark background. Through the course of this journal, I found that pages that had these kind of random shape underpaintings proved very difficult for me overall. So this is a pretty good use, I think, of a random page. Now, the page here on the left was not technically one that I did as part of the challenge. I did this one one evening, and I did it on a day when I had some free time. So I think this probably took more like an hour. But I'm really excited about this painting because I was about halfway through the challenge. It says here I was, just halfway through. It was September 11th. And I had skipped this page because I thought that the shapes I had painted were too random. There's basically a square of yellow here, a square of yellow here, and then some purple blobs over here. And at the time that I was working through the challenge, I thought, well, that's impossible. That was a really dumb way for me to pre-tone that page. But then one day I was skimming through a Facebook group of landscape reference photos that I belong to, and this little nocturne came up with a yellow building that seemed to stack up into these perfect little squares and this dark shadowy side. And I realized it would be absolutely perfect for my sketchbook page. So I came in here and made this effort. I haven't done a lot of nocturnes, but I really like that one. And here my hydrangea, that was one of my morning 20-minute studies. What I really like about this one, if you can see here, the paint I was using was I can zoom in a little for you, was a Daniel Smith Primatech Serpentine Green. And the Serpentine Green is one of their super granulating colors. And when it granulates, this kind of pink emerges from it, which I just find really, really interesting. I really liked that effect. I did not know that that was going to happen. Okay. Okay, so another spread where I have some really bright underpaintings. I ended up loving this combination. For the underpaintings, I used Derwent Inktense paints, which they sort of behave like watercolor when you're painting, but they don't reactivate. They're not technically watercolor, they're ink. And as such, once you lay them on the page and they've soaked into the page, they really don't reactivate. And that's one of the reasons I used them, so that I could come in with watercolor and not move that underpainting. So I really loved this combination. This was, I believe, poppy and burnt yellow ochre. It's the same underpainting. Generally, I use the same colors on both sides. So I had the same color here and here. And this was from some photos of zinnias that I had taken in my own yard. I patiently waited for the bee to be in a perfect position. At this page, my landscape here, this is a photo that I took in London when I was there this summer. This is near Borough Market. And I just loved the shapes, all these triangles that formed. I really thought that was interesting. And the day I took it, it was this really, really hot day. It was one of the hottest days. It was the hottest day of my trip, and I think one of the hottest days of their summer. And I thought the red and yellow gave it that warm summer vibe. Okay, once I started on my vacation pictures, I couldn't seem to stop myself. So this spread, these are both from photo references from Edinburgh. And in this case, I had painted again with that burnt yellow ochre, but this time that purple is, I'm pretty sure it's the plum shade of Inktense. And so using that yellow and purple for the kind of warm and cool, I thought fit in with the vibes of Edinburgh. And these are really short studies. As you can see, I have notes on here. This one I let myself go beyond 20 minutes. I went to 26 minutes. But when I was in Edinburgh, I found the landscape there so overwhelming. The buildings were so detailed. I had a really hard time sketching in person there. So I had a lot of fun throughout the 20-day challenge of revisiting my Edinburgh pictures and practicing simplification, seeing if I could get those shapes down. Okay, so now we have a page where things went a bit more experimental. These pages, I used some mixed media techniques. So in addition to my Inktense underpainting and watercolor, I also was using oil pastels. I recently got some Sennelier oil pastels and wanted to give them a try. I think ultimately this paper is way too textured for oil pastels, but I'm really looking forward to playing with them on a smoother paper. This page here, this was another photo reference from London. This was from the Japanese garden in Regent Park. And there was, the underpainting was green and blue kind of blob that I thought looked a lot like a water shape. So I tried to play that up. And I had a very hard time figuring out what of my white media would cover that Inktense. So I did try down here oil pastel, not very successfully. I ended up on some kind of heron, I think. I ended up using Posca pen, and even that didn't cover it very well. I had a really hard time with that. Because I was doing such short studies, I didn't think I had time to like get out and fiddle with my gouache. So probably gouache would have been the better choice. And this is another page here with my seashells and sand dollar that I had painted so randomly, and I had done the underpainting so darkly that I really wasn't sure I was ever going to be able to use that page. So I did my seashells with the oil pastel and then deepened the colors around it. It's not a totally successful page, but it was a really fun experiment, and I want to play around more with this mixed media technique for sure. Okay, so now here you can see my page on the left I haven't done anything with yet. The shapes are pretty random and they're pretty dark. As I went through my challenge, I learned this is not a good strategy for a watercolor artist. So my plan is to come back on this page sometime in the future, probably with gouache. But for its facing page here, I did try a view of London from the Sky Garden from a photo that I took. So this is a view from the 34th floor or something like that, with the Tower Bridge and the Tower of London. And the drawing took me the whole time. It took me the whole 20 minutes. And I don't think it came out great, but it did feel like a good use of the underpainting in terms of the shapes that I needed, which is really what I was focused on. As you can see, I've got some pages to come back to in the future. Very excited about that. But here on, I didn't put a date on this one, so I think this must have actually been on September 15th. I used a photo that I had of the Tower Bridge in London and used that purple and yellow background. I think this one came out really nicely. I like the way the yellow from up here is repeated down here to give a sense of that reflection in the water. It was a lot of fun to do. Now this page is one of my favorite pages on the left, with the slow sign. I had taken a photo reference of sunflowers in one of my neighbor's medians, and there's actually is a big yellow road sign at the edge of his sunflowers that says speed hump, which isn't the most pleasing set of words, but the message of the sign, of course, is slow down because there's a speed hump ahead. And the sign and the sunflowers were almost the same color, and the sun was hitting them. It was just so fun to see and to think it's the sign is telling you to slow down for the flowers. So when I did my interpretation, that is how I made it. And this one here with the church, this is another example where I got some mixed media involved and tried to come back in and get some blue to cover up the original underpainting, but not super successful. All right, this is definitely one of my favorite spreads. This is two more photos from my travels. This pagoda one is from London, and this is some kind of Buddhist temple structure that is sitting in a park right on the banks of the Thames, and that is all I know about it. I did the boat ride from Kew to Westminster, and this was one of the things I photographed. I don't really know anything about it. I haven't looked it up, but it was a beautiful sunny day and the sun was hitting it, and I tried to capture that here. The underpainting in this case was a like zigzag. You can kind of see the yellow, pink, yellow, pink. Very, very random shape. And that was a type of underpainting I was really nervous about going into this challenge. And when I did this page, basically I decided I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to put my drawing down, even though I don't see an obvious shape connection here, and we're just going to see what happens. And I'm really glad I did. I love this bright spot here where the sun was catching the building. And yeah, I think it just came out really neat. And for this page, this is a cafe in Edinburgh. And this page had only a really small underpainting, which you can see most of, this kind of square that was just the pink and yellow blurred together. And I decided to make that the sort of central area for the Elephant House Cafe. So this page over here on the left, we have a sort of seascape from a photo I took in Ogunquit, Maine. And for this one, what I was really happy with is the sky. I like the way the underpainting shines through and gives that texture and interest to the sky. I did come back with oil pastel over the water and use some watercolor pencil and pastel on the rocks for texture. My facing page here, this is another London view. It's something I took a photo of that I have no idea. I don't remember anything about this except that I took a photo. And what you see on the page took me the whole 20 minutes, and that is where I gave up on this one because it was just a little more complicated than I bargained for. Maybe I'll come back to it. Okay, and this one had no underpainting. This is the first one I did in this book, so we'll just enjoy that, but it's not really part of the challenge, nor is that. And I still have pages to go here, but this was one of my last days of the challenge. I was kind of playing with perspective a little bit. There's a dark purple underpainting to this portion of the building and the yellow below that fit with a reference I found through a Facebook group. And for this one, this is another Facebook photo reference. And it had a pretty random underpainting, just kind of like yellow and blue splotches with blue mostly concentrated down here. And in the reference, the building goes into shadow. So I thought I would use that. Obviously the complications here are the roof lines and angles, which I haven't gotten quite right. However, I used continuous line for those and I didn't belabor them, so I was really happy that I was able to force myself to keep moving, be pretty quick, and get the feeling of the shapes. And finally, this was the last day of the challenge with another Facebook photo reference. I had run out of my own by then. And this page, I would say, a classic example of overworking. I overdid things here a bit, but I did really like this kind of moody sky and the hint of reflection from those houses. I think this is a photo from Norway. So I hope you enjoyed this little flip through of my sketchbook, and perhaps you're even inspired to try this method of toning some pages and painting on top of them yourself. I hope that you do. And if you do, give me a shout and let me know how it goes.